Good afternoon, and thank you for watching this session about antimicrobial stewardship in long-term care, focusing on staff education and engagement. My name is Kate Tyner, and I work at Nebraska ICAP and ASAP. This presentation is part of a set, and if you haven't listened to the related presentations, then I want to encourage you to take this opportunity to do so. Perhaps you found this presentation through a search, but haven't visited the Nebraska ASAP website. If you haven't been to the website, please use the link at the top of this screen. You can navigate to the companion workbook, associated training videos, and additional tools designed specifically for long-term care. Especially the workbook can be found by clicking on the red arrow pictured in the orange callout circle on this screen. So what is in this talk? This presentation serves as a reminder to you that the stewardship program is meant to be multidisciplinary. Both the CDC long-term care core elements and the AHRQ toolkits speak to the need for team-based action. Long-term care facility antimicrobial stewardship really requires a team. This talk will work through the education and engagement which is needed to build the team and to move through any kind of stewardship steps. As mentioned in the previous slide, ensure that you download the associated workbook. Please take the time to brainstorm the potential partners in your facility, their names, their unique talents, and how they can help. For example, what specific ways could you partner with a consultant pharmacist? We have worked in Nebraska to train consultant pharmacists, but it is not common for the consultants to have specific training on long-term care and antimicrobial stewardship. You may need to share resources with your consultants. It is important to think of other people in your facility who can be wells of energy and resources. Consider this as the most basic engagement list. These are the roles and the people that the AHRQ names as essential program partners for antimicrobial stewardship. No matter what action or effort your facility enacts for stewardship, it will require training team members at your facility. So think about your education coordinator. Are there existing training opportunities that you could add antimicrobial stewardship content? What about the ADON or DON? Perhaps they have relationships with the medical director and can assist with building consensus or pushing efforts forward. Regarding information technology, do they know to check with you if stewardship tools become available in whatever electronic platform you're using? They may need to be guided to owning that kind of task. If information technology, like the tools in the electronic health record, are available, can they assist, that is the IT team, with the assurance of data entry accuracy and completion? It is important that other team members can and should work with you to make the program work. More formally, these boxes really line up from the AHRQ perspective, who can and should be contributing: champions, stewardship staff, and monitoring staff. In addition, I've added some call-out boxes, some blue boxes, which are my opinion. While the IP or infection preventionist has experience and expertise for many of these bullets, it's not realistic to think that the IP can or should do them all. So reviewing those items, think about the champions themselves. That could be the medical director, the pharmacist, the educator. These are people who can develop agendas and policies, lead training, and provide leadership support. Stewardship staff are people who can help develop training or help select existing tools that will be meaningful to team members. For example, if you're an infection preventionist, not a pharmacist, perhaps your pharmacist can help you to understand what tools may be good for physicians and pharmacists. Review of the tools, things like SBARs, may need to be reviewed by clinical team members to understand how they work and how education would proceed. And then the monitoring staff are important. No matter what you put into place, you're going to want to compile data on antibiotic use, for example. You want to enter things into a database, and you want to develop findings and communicate them. And so it is important to identify who within your team can help you with some of those day-to-day items. On this slide, I have a page from the workbook that I mentioned before. And taking those specific tasks that we reviewed on the previous slide, this brainstorm tool is built on those tasks. And I really encourage you to look at each one of these items and write down some names, some specific names of people who you think could be helpful. Perhaps this is something you want to fill out with your DON or with your pharmacist. But again, you're putting your head together. You're not promising that a person can do these tasks, etc., but it may help you really generate some ideas about who you would like to help you with tasks. Again, this doesn't have to be anything that, goes on blast within your facility, but it may help you to understand where and who you can look to for some assistance. So this talk includes both engagement and education, which overlap quite a bit. In this example, I've mapped out the action-based long-term care core elements of the antibiotic stewardship program. I've used as an example an intervention to decrease overuse of antibiotics for urinary tract infections. Many of you listening to this talk have tried to implement a UTI SBAR or something like that in the past. And so I hope that this is a relatable example, something that you can compare your own experience to. So if you look in the left lower corner at the reporting element, this is a place where we can address our engagement step. Think about showing the facility UTI data at your QAPI or your stewardship committee, intending to generate discussion. Are the urinary tract infections trending up or down? If you have implemented a UTI SBAR, are people filling it out? If you have clinical team members at the QAPI or the stewardship committee meeting, let them tell you what is going well with that SBAR tool and what seems like a barrier or what they're finding difficult. Usually, implementation of the SBAR requires some concerted feedback on usage and continued pressure and education to complete it. Are the team members filling it out correctly? Depending on your findings and the discussion in that stewardship committee, this may be where re-education is needed and takes you into the next step of that cycle. That relates well to the education core element in action. You see that these elements, these action steps, are emerging as a cycle, a process improvement cycle where each step relates to the others. Then we can consider more advanced engagement. I would like you to picture advanced engagement, something like moving beyond the stewardship team, probably engaging the resident care team so that it can help provide examples. It will help those people to understand the needs of the stewardship program, talking about some recent case examples, some reviewing of resident outcomes, such as what is listed on the slide here. Engagement is the more personal touch of getting buy-in and building consensus and interest, and even getting some excitement about stewardship actions. While education can be sometimes dry and feel a little bit like work, engagement hopefully will fill out that education and add color and heart to the effort. Unfortunately, no one wants to do extra steps just because you said so. So we really need those team members to understand why and buy into the approach. Healthcare workers are incredibly efficient people. They need to be coached when they need to require an extra step, such as reviewing a course of antibiotic therapy to see if it makes sense. In order to get people on board with that intervention, you're probably going to be doing a lot of education and re-education. If this fits you and your facility, make sure you are documenting that engagement work as part of your educational campaign. Where are these discussions taking place? Could you add a simple sign-in sheet so that you can track who has had some of those discussions with you? If you're doing education online, can folks click a box to attest to completion of the recorded presentation or slide set? Can they print out a certificate that they've completed the education? Those are all things that will help you document your education efforts. Regarding the selection of education and topics, it is important to recognize that we work in a field with near constant updates to practice. How do you prioritize what education is most necessary? This is also an important documentation step in your process. Tell the story of why education was needed and which resource was selected. That may be from the minutes of that stewardship committee meeting or QAPI. For the antimicrobial stewardship program, there really are a ton of really nice resources that already exist. So if you're thinking to yourself, you have to create something yourself, then I think you might be making too much work for yourself. In acknowledgement of the need to prioritize, you have to work towards fixing stuff that you see in practice. What would be a timely and practical educational intervention at your facility based on your facility's needs. With that, we see that immediate application is also essential to adult learning. And to make this more personal to your facilities team, it will help to talk about recent examples. Again, perhaps a resident case or an experience that we don't have to say people's names or things like that, but to really tell people what you've seen in a case review, again, makes it personal, adds some color to the effort, and brings some heart to why you're asking to do these interventions. Certainly when it comes to adult learning styles, it's also important to recognize that what works for one healthcare worker will not work for all. We have multiple shifts, multiple learning styles, certainly different types of professionals, nurses, providers, and medical aides, for example. When designing an intervention, you will need to try to target the education specifically to the type of healthcare worker. Sharing videos or case reports might be a really good avenue for your providers. Clinical team members, like the nurses and aides, may need something more informal and flexible, for example, walking rounds. Walking rounds would lend themselves to, again, flexibility when people can get to it, and will also give you a chance to have some back and forth conversation with the team. It would give you a chance to hear their questions and talk through barriers. But also, there are going to be days where this is totally not going to fit, and we have to be honest about that. For example, if the ambulance has come to visit the unit this day, it's probably not the right time to do education. So again, we have to be prepared for the unexpected and be flexible in our approach. Here is an example of a tool that could be used as a supplement to walking rounds. This might be something that an MA, an LPN, or a CNA might find useful if you are working to decrease the inappropriate treatment of urinary tract infections. Remember the need for engagement, though. This tool should not be randomly selected or used. It should fit with your program's current priorities. If it fits, picture holding some kind of brief huddle, maybe doing a sign-in sheet and spending 2 or 3 minutes with the team. Using this tool, it has a front and a back, and I'll show you on the next page the back of the form, but you could use it as a conversation aid, talking about the importance of working through delirium and not jumping to urinary culture, for example. Here's the back side of that rounding tool or that education sheet. Personally, if I was doing the walking rounds, this would be a good opportunity to get engagement from the team. I would ask them if they've ever used interventions like this when working with residents who are exhibiting signs of acute confusion or dementia or delirium. What worked for them? What really didn't? Is there anybody on the unit today that might benefit from some of these new ideas? Remember that people, especially adult learners, will benefit a lot more from an education if they can implement that education right away or tell you how to apply it in their own practice. So make sure you leave some room to talk back and forth with your team members. When the target is professional adults for education, it's important to recognize that the method for delivery needs to accommodate different learning styles. We have some great options listed on this slide. However, it would not be realistic to offer these different modes every single time. But think about who you target and how you want to reach them. Regarding your specific mission or what you're working on at your facility, how might you add just one more method to your current mode? And then, when it's time to re-educate, do you need to switch something up? Are there some fresh ideas on this slide? I have some examples here on the next slide. These are some ideas that we've heard at Nebraska ASAP that some facilities have used from the field. For example, when facilities have had an antibiogram available and they've had some interpretation highlights, it's really nice to take that, simply print it out and put it into the mailbox of providers or email it to providers if they're used to receiving electronic messages. Sometimes if you have seen a great education and you want others to experience that same education, think about how you would send that. Maybe you're just trying to see if other team members on that stewardship committee agree. Do they like the education? In that case, it would be helpful to say, hey, I saw this great education. Tell them what you liked about it and share. Include the link. Even something as simple as placing a newsletter in the break room or on a bulletin board, such as the Antimicrobial Advocate from Nebraska ASAP, is a way to engage some people. All healthcare workers kind of like choose their education style a little differently. So again, it's nice to have some items that are available You can also think about hanging posters in break rooms or staff restrooms and maybe rotating those every couple of months. There's some good examples in that workbook that I've referred to a couple times. It is reasonable and normal for prescribers to receive additional education and updates. I realize from talking to a lot of facility infection preventionists, this can really be an intimidating prospect of how do we approach education for the physicians who write prescriptions at our facility. There are topics that are unique to the care of elders and unique to your region. So there will be helpful things for those providers. In addition, there have been tremendous gains in the world of antibiotic stewardship. So even connecting providers to something like the Nebraska ASAP newsletter, the Antimicrobial Advocate, could be impactful. So providing a conduit of research and literature on antibiotic therapy can be considered. Again, the resources we're recommending come from our medical directors and our pharmacists. And so these can be really nice ways to provide that information back to your prescribers at your facility. I will mention that workbook one more time. Our pharmacist, Jenna, has provided this excellent resource in the notebook. In the workbook, this resource is 3 different pages. It's actually kind of long, but the table provides common stewardship topics with the concepts that should be included when you do education and the recommendation for the audience that should receive that education. And so this is something nice. You can imagine if you were sitting in your QAPI or your Antimicrobial Stewardship Committee using a table like this. If you had identified, for example, that antimicrobial resistance is a topic that your team really probably needs more information on, you could look at the concepts are going to be selection, mutation, infection prevention and control, which audience members should receive that education. And then you see the principles, learning outcomes, and competencies will help you search for tools that offer that kind of education. Note that especially if you're working in Nebraska, where Nebraska ASAP is a wonderful resource, if you wish for assistance with content on these items, this would be a great time to reach out to Nebraska ASAP. For example, you know you want to educate on antimicrobial resistance, you're wondering what's available, that's a time to simply call us up and ask, hey, what do you recommend for that? We can send, I'm sorry, I advanced there, I didn't mean to. We can send you some really great educational material at that time. One of the examples is here on this slide. Antibiotic resistance is something that's really important. It's so important that our medical director, the HAI team medical director at DHHS in Nebraska, Dr. Salman Ashraf, gives a talk on antimicrobial resistance in Nebraska every year at our Antimicrobial Stewardship Summit. And so we have recorded these sessions over the last several years, and we can give you a link to that presentation specific to 2025. And it doesn't cost money, and it's available on YouTube. So if you think that this would fit you well, we can send you links to those videos, or you can search for them yourself. Remember that if you're just starting up your program and you need to engage nurses, pharmacists, and providers about the need, antimicrobial resistance is a good place to start. But again, we want you to choose what fits your environment the best. And I will add a caveat to this. When I communicate with my medical directors, I'm pretty careful about how I do that. I use those chances wisely. I only send things that I have watched and which resonate with me. For example, I'm going to be very deliberate about that message. In fact, I was at a conference with my medical director, Dr. Ashraf, just this year. And in a presentation, I was really intrigued by a specific statistic that I had heard from another state, and it really surprised me. I had a conversation with Dr. Ashraf later. I told him about that specific number at the presentation, and it started a nice conversation. Do we have the same data for our state? How could we get it? So the point I'm making here is that you have to use that chance wisely. Make sure you pay attention to the presentation that you intend to share. Let there be some pointers as to why did you think that was impactful? Why does it fit your population well? And then you can share that content and recommend it. Again, that can be something that your whole stewardship committee kind of embarks on together and makes a choice together. But again, the point I'm making there is that there are some really good educational materials out there that you don't have to create that every single time. So as we talk about education and engagement, we have to include the importance of measuring or tracking the outcome. That is, was the education useful and was it retained? So with the UTI SBAR example, if you've done that in your facility, some of the educational outcomes that you might hear, sure, you would want to ask your team members, did they feel like they rated the education highly? What did they understand it? Did they take something from the lesson? But you can also take some pretty objective measures to see how many times was that tool completed? Are we seeing that number go up? Are we seeing a UTI SBAR completed every time a urinary culture is ordered, for example? That's a pretty direct outcome. And if we're seeing those numbers really mismatch, then maybe that education wasn't great. If that was my facility, I'd definitely go and talk to my clinical team members and ask them more about what did you not like about that education? What was missing? Or, what are we still struggling? So if you have implemented the SBAR tool and you see that nurses are documenting on it well, we're seeing numbers that are very stable, are they completing it well? So when you review the data that's coming in, are they completing the form adequately? Is it really being used well? Or are they putting in a lot of comments and driving urine culture based on odor or color? Because remember, we don't want to order urine cultures for those reasons. And so again, you can use some pretty objective measures in your action that do kind of rate back to that education. And you can make that education and tracking really work well together. What I hope you see here is that since learning outcomes couple up so nicely with tracking and reporting, I hope they don't feel like extra steps. They're all linked up and they're very efficient when we work them together in the cycle. And here again, I have that same image that I had showed on a previous slide where we're talking about, again, that urinary SBAR kind of action and what we're doing about it and how we kind of keep just going around and around that process until we feel like that intervention is where we want it. Feels hardwired. But moving on, if we try to put together what we're learning today about engagement and education, we could look at it in a new example. Like a new stewardship example. So in this example, I tried to choose something that's a little less common. And so, for example, let's say that you're talking in the QAPI or the stewardship subcommittee that people feel a little like this isn't working. Like a lot of our antibiotic prescriptions are coming from outside the facility. They're coming from the ER. They're coming from when the residents go to their primary care doctor. And people are frustrated about that. You can use that dialogue to say, okay, is that something that we need to do something about? From an engagement perspective, it's something people are interested in. It's something that we can definitely try to track down. Where are those prescriptions getting started? We could turn that into a tracking. We could go and count those prescriptions. We could go and get some data on where are we seeing what providers are writing for those. And so there are some actions that relate pretty specifically to that. And once we have a little bit more information about these out-of-house antibiotic prescriptions, maybe we could come up with some education and actions to match that. Maybe there's a recent resident example. Something like a resident went out because they fell down and they went to the emergency room, but then they come back and, oh, here we have a prescription for a UTI. But the reason they left the facility was a fall. We hear that happen a lot and it really frustrates your team members. And so can you work on an intervention specific to that, such as an antibiotic timeout? So again, those engagement things, when people are excited or frustrated about a topic, those are great places to start. Where can we get some more data in that reporting step? What do we need to do education? We need a little bit more data about what's happening there, and we can really make this cycle work for us. So what are some key takeaways from the talk today? This is the final slide I have for this presentation. I hope that the key takeaways is that I want you to ensure that your team includes colleagues that can assist with engagement and education. It should not be the role of the single person. Second, I hope that engagement and education don't always feel like two separate and extra steps. Rather, I hope that they're pieces of the stewardship process and they really work into that cycle of performance improvement in stewardship action type steps. Finally, educational resources are available, and your team should not feel like they have to create something new. However, the team should work together to select the tools that seem to fit the initiative in your facility and population the very best. With that, in the live presentation, I was able to take questions. If you have questions about this, I encourage you to call Nebraska ASAP at 402-552-2881. That will reach the Nebraska ICAP and ASAP main business number. And you can ask, hey, I have a question about antimicrobial stewardship, and perhaps your specific question, and that will get routed to the person who's most qualified to answer that question. Perhaps that will be me. Perhaps that will be Jenna Preisker, our stewardship pharmacist. So again, thank you for your time today. I hope it was useful, and I hope you get to go to the Nebraska ASAP website and really get to take a look at all the tools we have that can help your program.